Imagine waking up in the heart of Copenhagen, your cafe, bike lanes, bus stops, all just a few minutes away. Or, picture commuting 45 minutes from a spacious house in the suburbs. Which would you prefer if you moved to Denmark? In this video, I'll show you why many Danes choose to live in apartments, not just because of space, but for lifestyle, policy, and planning. And stay tuned, there's one surprise factor that's deeply rooted in Danish history I'll get back to later. It's not just about cost. Apartments in Denmark offer something bigger: community, sustainability, public transport, and freedom from maintenance. But there are trade-offs, and I'll show you both sides. By the end you'll understand exactly why so many Danes prefer apartment living. Sustainability and green energy. Viking heritage. Welfare system. New Nordic food. Welcome to Denmark Explained, your front row seat to the hidden gems, quirky traditions, and powerful stories that make Danish culture truly unforgettable. When people imagine life in Denmark, they often picture cozy houses with gardens, maybe even a little red wooden home surrounded by nature. But here's the twist: a huge part of the population actually lives in apartments. Why is that? Let's start with the numbers, because they reveal a lot about how people in Denmark really live. Across the country there are about 2.8 million homes. Out of these, close to 4 out of 10 are apartments, while just over 4 out of 10 are detached houses. The rest are terraced or semi-detached homes. That means nearly half the population is choosing apartment living, not as a backup, but as a mainstream lifestyle. Already surprising, right? Now, when we look at ownership, things get even more interesting. A little more than half of all households own their homes, while the rest rent. This balance shows that renting is not seen as unusual or temporary in Denmark. In fact, it's completely normal for families, students, and even professionals to rent an apartment for many years. But why would people stick with renting instead of buying? We'll get to that a bit later. Let's also talk about size, because this is where apartments and houses really differ. The average apartment is around 79 square meters, while the average home overall is closer to 112 square meters. So yes, apartments are smaller, but here's the catch. Smaller homes also mean less cleaning, lower heating bills, and more time spent outside in community spaces. And that leads us to one of the first cultural clues. Danes value outdoor life and shared spaces just as much as private square meters. Another detail worth noting is how housing is priced. Detached houses, especially in city centers, are extremely expensive per square meter. By comparison, apartments give people the chance to live in urban areas without paying the same high price. And when you think about how people get around, on bikes, by train, or by metro, living in an apartment close to everything suddenly looks very attractive. Here's something that may surprise you. The average space per person in Denmark is about 54 square meters. That's actually quite generous compared to many other European countries. So even though apartments might be smaller than houses, people don't feel cramped. They balance private living with public parks, waterfronts, and green courtyards, which are built right into many apartment complexes. We're already seeing how numbers alone explain a lot. Apartments are not a niche, but a major part of everyday life. They fit the cultural mindset of practicality, community, and sustainability. But this is only the surface. The real story comes when we ask, why are so many people actively choosing apartments when they could dream of a house? The answer is not just about money, it's about how Denmark designs its cities and its lifestyle. We'll dig into that in the next chapter. We saw how common apartment living is in Denmark. Now let's dig into why. The answer lies in urban planning, culture, and policy. I'll walk you through 3 big reasons. By the second reason, you'll start seeing how interlinked everything is. Also, I'll return to that surprise historical factor I teased at the start. Keep an ear out. When we think about why so many people in Denmark live in apartments, one word comes to mind: cities. Over the past decades, the big urban areas have been growing fast. The capital region alone has seen its population rise by more than 10% in just 10 years. That kind of growth puts pressure on housing, and the most realistic solution is to build upwards, not outwards. Take a closer look at the numbers. Today, more than 1 in 5 residents of Denmark live in urban agglomerations with over 1 million people. That means dense city living is the norm for a large part of the population. And when land is limited, apartments become the practical choice. But there's more at play than just space, there's lifestyle. Commuting tells a fascinating story. In the capital, the average trip to work or school is less than 30 minutes, covering about 11 kilometers. That's short compared to many other countries. Why? Because most people live close to where they work, and the infrastructure is designed for it. Add to that the fact that over 40% of commuters use bicycles daily, and suddenly apartment living near the city center makes perfect sense. Would you rather spend an hour in traffic every day or ride a bike for 15 minutes and be home? But step outside the largest cities, and the picture changes. In rural areas, commutes often stretch to 22 kilometers or more, with some regions averaging over 30. The willingness to make long trips has even dropped sharply in recent years. People are less willing to drive far, and that pushes demand for apartments close to jobs, schools, and culture. Public policy and investment also guide people toward denser housing. Each year, the country invests a steady share of its GDP in transport infrastructure, but the focus has increasingly been on metro lines, buses, and walkable neighborhoods in cities. Add to that the government's push for thousands of new apartments in urban areas to meet demand, and you can see how the system itself favors compact living. Here's another layer: lifestyle values. People here put a premium on free time, health, and sustainability. Living in an apartment near shops, parks, schools, and cultural life supports that. Smaller homes don't feel like a sacrifice if everything you need is just around the corner. So when you put all of this together, population growth, commuting habits, infrastructure design, and cultural values, you get the picture. Apartments aren't just cheaper or more available, they are woven into the way modern urban life works here. And in the next part, we'll see how history and housing policy made apartments not only common, but actually desirable for generations of residents. Here's something to consider. About 20% of Danes live in what's called social housing, where rents are regulated, and there are rules on eligibility. Additionally, cooperative housing and private renting make up substantial shares of the apartment market. These systems reduce risk for residents and help many people live affordably in urban centers. So, if you were moving to Denmark, would you prefer? Option A: owning an apartment or house, investing long-term, having full control, or Option B: renting an apartment, more flexibility, less upkeep, closer to city and services. Comment below which you lean toward, and I'll share in the comments how that lines up with how many Danes actually live. Planning a trip to Denmark? Or maybe you're moving there soon? Don't just Google your way through it. Let DenmarkExplained.com be your shortcut to a smoother, smarter, and way more fun experience. At DenmarkExplained.com/products, you'll find itineraries, ready-made plans that turn confusion into unforgettable days. eBooks, packed with local insights, cultural tips, and everyday know-how. No boring history lessons, just stuff that actually helps. Expat guides, moving to Denmark? Get the info you wish someone told you before you landed. Everything's digital, everything's simple, and everything's designed to make Denmark feel less confusing, and way more cozy. So skip the stress, and get the guides that explain Denmark, clearly, cleverly, and in plain English. Check it out now at DenmarkExplained.com/products. Your trip, our tips, let's make it amazing. If you're finding this insight useful, hit like, subscribe, and share. If you have questions about specific cities, Copenhagen, Aarhus, smaller towns, drop them in the comments. I'll cover them in future videos. Let's return to that surprise historical factor I promised, and then examine how housing policy and welfare shape apartment life in Denmark. These are not just nice-to-knows, they affect your everyday comfort, cost, and choice. When you look at apartment living in Denmark today, it's not just a matter of modern lifestyle, it's rooted in history and policy. For over a century, the country has taken a very deliberate approach to housing. One of the biggest reasons so many Danes live in apartments is the role of social housing and cooperative housing. Social housing is not a small niche. About 1 in 5 homes in the country are part of this system. That's around 573,000 dwellings, managed by more than 650 organizations. And here's the interesting part. These homes are not just for low-income families. They're designed to be mixed communities. Teachers, students, young families, and retirees often live side by side. It's about creating stability and affordability across society, not isolating certain groups. And here's a detail worth pausing on. Municipalities have the right to reserve up to a quarter of these homes for people with extra needs, such as newcomers, the unemployed, or those with disabilities. That means the system is both inclusive and flexible. But what does this mean for apartments? It means that in many urban areas, affordable apartment blocks have been built and maintained for decades, shaping the very fabric of city life. Then we have cooperative housing. Today there are more than 210,000 cooperative units nationwide, and in the capital city, over a third of apartment buildings are run this way. This model is fascinating because it blends ownership with community. People don't buy a single flat outright, instead, they buy into the cooperative that owns the building. The result? Lower prices than the private market and a strong sense of shared responsibility. Think about it. In a world where speculation often drives housing costs through the roof, cooperative housing has acted as a stabilizer. It's no wonder that co-ops make up about 7 to 8% of all housing in the country. And when you look at the rental market overall, co-ops account for around 10%, a significant share that keeps apartments accessible to everyday people. Now, here's where history loops back to the present. After World War II, there was a massive housing shortage, and the government invested heavily in building apartments rather than single-family houses. That decision has carried forward for generations. Today, apartments aren't just a fallback option, they're often seen as the smart choice. What does this mean for someone considering a move? Well, if you're looking for community, affordability, and easy access to city life, the apartment sector, shaped by social housing and co-ops, offers opportunities you won't find in many other countries. And in the next chapter, we'll explore how modern design and sustainability have turned these apartments into not only affordable homes, but some of the greenest and most forward-looking spaces in Europe. Having explored where apartment living thrives in Denmark, now let's look at what people sometimes miss, the trade-offs, so that if you move here, you can decide what's right for you. By now, we've seen that apartments are common in Denmark because of city growth, commuting habits, and historical housing policies. But let's talk about the other side of the story: costs, space, and lifestyle trade-offs. Why do so many people still choose apartments over houses, even if the space is smaller? First, let's look at the numbers. Apartment prices have been rising steadily over the last decade. In Copenhagen, for example, the average price per square meter for an apartment is around 16,100, while detached houses sit slightly higher at 17,800 per square meter. That might not sound like a huge difference, but when you multiply it across 80 or 100 square meters, the total cost gap becomes significant. And here's a quick insight: in central urban areas, apartment prices have doubled in the last 10 years. That's a dramatic increase, yet many people still prefer them over buying a house farther away from work. Size is another factor. The median rented apartment is about 87 square meters, compared to over 150 for a detached house. But smaller doesn't always mean worse. Apartments come with lower heating bills, less maintenance, and easier cleaning. Plus, in many buildings, there are shared spaces, courtyards, and even rooftop gardens. So while you're trading private square meters for a smaller unit, you gain access to community areas and amenities you might not have with a house. Location also plays a huge role. In the greater Copenhagen area, around 82% of rental listings are apartments. Houses are rare, and even semi-detached homes are far less common. That concentration of apartments keeps people close to jobs, schools, shops, and public transport. When your commute is 15 minutes by bike instead of an hour by car, living in a smaller apartment suddenly feels like a smart choice. Affordability and predictability are key reasons apartments remain popular. Cooperative apartments, social housing units, and private rentals all offer stable pricing compared to detached houses, which can fluctuate widely depending on the market. Over the past decade, house prices have risen by nearly 70% in some regions, while apartment prices, though also rising, tend to be more manageable for most families and young professionals. Finally, there's the lifestyle factor. People here value time, convenience, and sustainability. Choosing an apartment often means less upkeep, more access to urban amenities, and the chance to live in vibrant neighborhoods. And while it may seem like you're giving up space, you're gaining flexibility, community, and a practical urban lifestyle. So the takeaway is clear: apartments are not just about affordability, they're about efficiency, location, and modern living. And in the next video, we'll explore how technology, design, and sustainability are shaping the next generation of apartment living in Denmark. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning why so many people in Denmark choose to live in apartments. See you in the next video, and don't forget to click on the playlist to your right for more videos about life, culture, and living in Denmark.